I can't believe I just marked the 1-year anniversary of launching my own private practice. I was worried about the headaches of doing billing and documentation all on my own without any administrative support. But it turns out with Simple Practice, the paperwork is easier than I ever expected. Simple Practice is an all-in-one EHR that is HIPAA compliant, high-trust certified, and built specifically for therapists. One of my favorite features is how effortless it is to create super bills for my clients so they can get reimbursed quickly. Simple Practice helps me focus on what I love most, working with clients, by lightening up the business side of running my own practice. And if you're just starting out or growing your practice, they also have a credentialing service that helps you get paneled independently. It takes the total headache out of insurance enrollment, giving you full autonomy over your own contracts without any middleman platforms taking a cut. If you are ready to simplify the business side of your practice, now is a great time to try Simple Practice. Start with a 7-day free trial, then get 50% off your first 3 months. Just go to simplepractice.com to claim the offer. Again, that's simplepractice.com.
A lot of the skill of MI is using skills of good communication, reflective listening, and affirmation, many things that probably listeners are familiar with, but it's a very conscious and intentional and really kind of strategic use of these in order to promote someone's own conversations about change and growth.
That was Kristen Dempsey on Psychologists Off the Clock.
We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, author of Act for Burnout and Act Daily Journal.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and the author of an upcoming book on developing your confidence and social skills.
From Boston, I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, faculty at Brown University and author of Work, Parent, Thrive, and Why Don't You Understand Me?
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. Kristen Dempsey is a psychotherapist, trainer, and counselor educator in the San Francisco Bay Area. She has over 30 years' experience working with individuals, youth, and families with challenging behavioral issues that impact their lives, such as substance abuse disorder, co-occurring mental health and substance use disorders, trauma symptoms, and unresolved grief. Kristen has taught many classes in the counselor education curriculum, and she is currently focused on practitioner skill development, substance use disorder treatment, and effective practices in community mental health. Kristen is a member of the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers, or MINT, and she currently teaches motivational interviewing to behavioral health and other allied human services professionals. She is an adjunct professor at the Wright Institute's Counseling Psychology program and lecturing facility at San Francisco State University. Kristen is the author of the Harm Reduction Workbook for Addiction, and I invite you all to listen to my interview with her on that book in 2024. And she is a co-author of Advancing Motivational Interviewing, an experiential skills guide for mental health professionals that came out with PESI in April of this year. And she is a writer for the Mental Health and Substance Use Recovery Workbook, which will come out with New Harbinger May next year. Hi, everyone. I'm sitting here with Debbie to discuss my interview with Kristen Dempsey on advancing motivational interviewing. Some of you might remember that I've talked with Kristen before on harm reduction using motivational interviewing. And this time we're talking about her book, Advancing Motivational Interviewing, that really got my interest because I love motivational interviewing, and I know Debbie does too. And that's why we're sitting here together. And also because her book is looking at the more complex challenges in dealing with using MI with clients. So for example, what if the client doesn't even want to be there? The sort of like, this is how you use MI, but also like, this is what you do when you hit one of those really gnarly problems. And Debbie and I thought that we could do an intro before we launch you into my conversation with Kristen, because we both have our own love story with motivational interviewing. And that will explain to you why I love to have Kristen on and why I picked Debbie to help me out with this episode as well. So without further ado, Debbie, what were your thoughts on the interview?
Yeah, so I think that to your point earlier, motivational interviewing, we've done a few episodes over the years on motivational interviewing, and it's near and dear to my heart. I'm always excited to learn more about it because it's super helpful as a clinician for a number of reasons. I think any therapist out there has probably had clients who are ambivalent about change, or clients who come to therapy, but they're a little, you're kind of in this dance with them because there might be some resistance showing up. So certainly it's a complex approach. In some ways, it feels a little bit intuitive sometimes, but it's actually quite complex. So I always feel like I can learn more, and it really helps with my clinical work directly when I'm working with clients who might be ambivalent or a little resistant. But recently, I've actually found myself trying to pull it in almost to train my clients in it, because so many times I have a client who comes to therapy talking about their frustration with someone that they care deeply about, who they want to see change. And so just a few examples of that, a person who, like, I might have a client whose spouse is drinking too much alcohol or some other substance abuse pattern, and they're concerned. They love this person. Or, they have an aging parent who isn't caring for their health, who's maybe not taking care of themselves, not willing to get medical care or follow doctor's orders, and they're worried. They want their parent to be healthy and have a good long life. Or they might have a child who's maybe like a high school or college student who's kind of, taking on their own responsibility in life, and who has bad study habits, or who isn't engaging in school, or who's, maybe partying too much or something like that. And the commonality is that the client wants to make the other person change, right? They're like, what can I do to get this person to do the thing I want them to do? And so I know that sometimes those control efforts really backfire for people. Mm. And I'm often in the role of trying to help my client approach this in a very different way, right? To truly let go of control, but to maybe express support, to help the person that they love have a space where they can talk it over and maybe encourage and support change, but to let go of that agenda of like, I have to make them change, because that just does not work. And so, I bring it in this way, like, okay, here's this tool I was, as a therapist, have found really helpful that might be helpful for you to approach this. Like, of course you care and you want to support the person, but you're kind of going about this in a way that is very unlikely to help the situation. And Michael, how about you? What are your thoughts about that?
So for me, my love with MI, motivational interviewing, started because it is such a great manual for being a really good conversationalist. It covers the micro skills, as it's known in MI, the open-ended questions, the continuing the sentence, and so many other really good ways of just, being engaging in a conversation, where oftentimes a conversation is not about like, I want them to like me or I want to impress them. It's just like, no, I want to have a conversation with a person across from me, but I run out of things to say, or I make them uncomfortable by asking too many like weird yes, no questions. And MI comes in and it's like, no, like do this, and you'll be doing okay. And Kristen and Ali's book, they co-wrote it together, is a workbook. And that means that you get, a concept introduced. And then there are 2 pages where it's like, in this case, it's the client, right? It's not the person sitting across from you in the bus. It's a client you have in the room, but the principle is the same, where if the person says that, how would you apply this technique? Like, how would you now start applying those principles? And it reminded me a little bit of doing crossword puzzles, where you sit there and you think, what could this be? What could I say? And conversations are oftentimes a dance. And once both parties enjoy the conversation, it's easy flowing anyway. But just like with starting to dance, it is good to have a couple of guidelines at the beginning of where to put your feet. And MI does that beautifully. So, and on top of all of that, like Kristen is such a nice person. I actually got to meet her this year when she and her husband Adam came to Vienna, and we sat in the sun, we had a beer together, we talked about way too much motivational interviewing and way too few things about like what tourists should be looking at. And I apologize for that here, Kristen and Adam. But and I hope you all enjoy my conversation with Kristen Dempsey. Hey, just a quick sidebar here. I've been training people to develop their confidence and leave their comfort zone for over a decade now. Over the last couple of months, I took everything that I know on the matter and I turned it into a video course. It's 8 hours of confidence building awesomeness. The psychological principles, the exercises, the stories, the reflections, the glitter, everything. It's as comprehensive as I could possibly make it, and I'm incredibly proud how it turned out. Think back to a situation where you wanted to maybe start a conversation or speak up or just be yourself, and something stopped you. Maybe the story you've been telling yourself for years about who you are and what you're able to do. This is the course about that moment and how to do it differently the next time. You can find it here, herald.coach/course, and in the show notes. That's all. Back to the show. Kristen, so good to have you back on the show. It's been a minute.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I'm really glad to be back.
So I really enjoyed reading Advancing Motivational Interviewing, and I have so many questions for you, but I think that maybe there are some listeners joining us that maybe don't know what motivational interviewing is and how it works. So to get us started, could you give us a short high-level overview of what MI or motivational interviewing is?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for asking. I think motivational interviewing has actually been around now for a number of years. It's been around probably for at least 40 years. And over time, it's become really foundational to many of the ways that we think about helping people. And motivational interviewing, we're kind of defining it as ways of having conversations about change and growth that really allow people to connect with and get in touch with their own motivations for change, which sounds like so basic. And in so many ways it is. And yet there's a real skill and a thoughtfulness that goes into having these conversations. And it's based on a certain attitude of like openness and humility, which again, like, oh yeah, that's pretty much what we like to do with all kinds of helping, right? But again, it's a little bit challenging in terms of approaching these conversations in a way that we can be facilitative, kind of stay out of the way and be really open to someone's experience. And then a lot of the skill of MI is using kind of really standard micro skills or skills of like good communication, like reflective listening and affirmation, many things that probably listeners are familiar with. But it's a very conscious and intentional and really kind of strategic use of these in order to promote someone's own conversations about change and growth. And we really kind of promote and reinforce some of that conversation in order to kind of really help build the talking and thinking around change that then often helps kind of move to the next step of perhaps someone taking a step, becoming activated to start a change process for themselves.
That was a beautiful summary. Thank you for that. I am reminded of the first time I heard about MI and what it does and how it works. And I thought that there was so much overlap with, well, just being a good conversationalist. The open-ended questions, the affirmations, the reflections, the summaries, and all of that stuff. It might be done a little bit more purposefully in MI with like concrete like function behind it. Whereas in a conversation with a person sitting next to me in the bus, it is just giving me a little bit of structure, or back then it gave me a lot of structure of like, hey, like, am I like checking these boxes off right now? And you said that when the client is ready to move on, and I know, or to take action, and I know that you also work with acceptance and commitment therapy. How do those two combine? How does MI and ACT work together?
Yeah, thanks for this great question. I'm doing a lot of thinking about this right now too, with some colleagues. And I like to definitely start off with the fact that I think they're both very process oriented. I mean, clearly ACT is process oriented and MI. And I think, of course, any good effective communication style ultimately will be about process. And what I'm really thinking about here is that it's very attuned to context in terms of what any one person needs, like right now, where to begin. I often use kind of the Bruce Lee quote, "Be like water, my friend." And I think one of the ways that MI and ACT work really well together, a number of ways, but one thing that immediately comes to mind is I often think of staging and the process of like where's someone now, especially in terms of like stages of change. And that in pre-action, we can certainly use ACT for someone who's ambivalent or not really sure about where to start necessarily. I mean, we're opening up psychological flexibility, but sometimes having, I think, some of the conversations, even the beginning conversation about some aspect of creative helplessness can possibly feel like too much for some people, right? Like they're just so not there in terms of, I am so not ready for this particular piece around thinking about change, or I just need to have a conversation, be engaged. And that's where like MI is really beautiful. It's just, I'm thinking of you at the bus stop, talking to people and being a good conversationalist. The more that we are actually doing that, especially early on, even if we're using MI, the more it's just about, I just want to get to understand you. Kind of the better we are at using MI. So in these early stages of process, like engagement, I think is really the special place for motivational interviewing. And as we're helping someone start to explore and focus what's important to them and helping them generate some change talk and change language, perhaps start to move into some aspect of where they might be open to starting or really want to start. That's where I think we can really start to use some of the tools of ACT to help with that process. And that doesn't mean like early on when I'm having a conversation with someone and I'm just getting to know them, that there might be an opportunity to use, say, thought diffusion or, some aspect of selfless context, or, certainly, being here now in terms of like a mindfulness kind of experience. If it seems like someone's open to it. And again, in a very MI kind of way, check that out to see if that's something that someone would be willing to try or to sample. So I think there can be this dance back and forth, thinking about what are some of the tools, the ideas, the interventions to help come with this opening. I was think of opening like a flower, kind of process of ACT, and then how can the MI skills and attitude and conversational approach kind of get us there. The micro skills sometimes can be, I think, and again, when I say micro skills, I'm talking about the open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. Some folks may not call them micro skills. I call them skills. How we give information and advice, those important intervention pieces, how can that be the mortar or the glue that helps hold a conversation together, whether I'm using an ACT intervention or not? So I think there's places where they both fit together in terms of the process. And I think there's places where they can support each other, almost like creating a building, so we can have some fluidity as we move between the two approaches.
Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why customers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
As a small business owner, sometimes it feels like no matter how much planning you do, there's always surprises, like an urgent, expensive repair. But here's a surprise you will like. With Progressive, small business owners save 13% on their commercial auto insurance when they pay in full. So enjoy a surprise for once. Get a quote in as little as 8 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Discounts not available in all states or situations.
So you just mentioned the mortar, the bricks and the mortar, and that made me think of another facepalm moment, dare I say, when I read like 1 or 2 books on ACT back in the days when I got started on this magic show. And then I found a book on motivational interviewing, and my facepalm moment, this was me like being 6 months into my journey of like learning about psychology. And MI talked about the fixing reflex. I've heard your problem. Now let me tell you what to do with it. And MI, and I like specifically goes like, there's like, it's the fixing reflex. Like that's a standing term, I think, for that behavior of us, wanting to just jump in and say, hey, Kristen, I've heard your problem. I've heard you enough. Here's what you should be doing because that's going to solve your problem, which is I see so many coaches working in that. And it's behavior that I think psychologically speaking is described as punchable. Like when I see behavior like that in a professional, I was like, this is not how you do it. And this, like a decade ago when I read about this fixing reflex, this was like, oh no, Michael, like this is like, look at that. Not only will it help people facilitate better change when you don't jump in wisecracking, and it will also just make better conversations with people around us, because me reading about the fixing reflex back then wasn't, like you can work with your clients differently, because I didn't work with clients. I was learning this for my own benefit. My thinking went like, oh no, this is how I treat my friends and everyone around me. I'm like immediately going into wisecracking mode, and maybe I should keep my mouth shut a little bit longer and let people talk. And ironically enough, I've been talking for a while now. So let me pass over this baton to you on the fixing reflex, and also on what in the book you called signing the contract, because those two go a little bit hand in hand.
I think about the fixing reflex almost, in a way that it's like I can imagine it for myself anyway, like a little red light. It's almost kind of always on, and that I have to be aware that I can always it's almost like an alarm. Like I can always be caught up in it at any moment. I just have to be aware that this little thing is kind of always pulsing out there. And the way I've kind of understand it for myself is that my or anybody's desire to help people, that's a good thing, right? I mean, it's a great thing. I really want to be there and listen and be of use. And so this kind of little red light kind of thing is kind of driving some of that like desire to help. But it's kind of like an other side of the coin kind of situation. Like the other side of that coin is almost always that fixing reflex, And so even with my best intentions, even with like decades and decades of experience doing this work, boy, that fixing reflex doesn't just find a way of just slipping into a conversation. And I also think for people I train or for other clinicians I talk to, like it gives me compassion about their situation as well. And even when I'm training, I try to speak to the fixing reflex from a place of trying not to shame people for having it. Like ultimately the fact that you do want to fix and help is like, it's like a great thing. Yeah. So with signing the contract, this is a concept actually that I included in the book. It's from Terry Moyers, who's a researcher and practitioner, like leader, incredibly well-known, like MI trainer, researcher in our community, has this idea of don't sign the contract, which is don't kind of buy into, if I'm from this way I kind of understand it, don't buy into this fact that people have to do something, right? Like that someone's here because they're mandated for some particular way, and that because there's a mandate, sometimes we have, in this country, maybe other countries, someone might come in with like a list of things they have to do for probation, whether it's, legal probation or it's like academic probation or whatever it might be. And there's this thing of like, I have to go and check off these things in order to, be freed or be reinstated or whatever it is that they have to do. And clearly, like, those are things definitely, they're going to be out there and probably will be talked about at some point, to be sure. But the sense of, sometimes when we see it, like as a provider, it's like, oh, I have to get this person to do all that stuff. I have to somehow have to deliver the goods.
And quickly.
Too. Right. And it's like, it's just kind of stop and just be like, okay, you have this, and tell me who you are. You have this, and tell me your story. Like, why are we sitting here talking about this contract here today? And what is of use to you? And this, it can be, a challenging conversation too, because often folks come in where it's like, I just need something fixed. They need something fixed, or I just want this done with. I just want to move on with my life. I don't know if they want to do all this stuff, but I want to get out of this. So it's being able to come into a place of, can we just be here together now? Start to have this conversation, and still coming from the place of, I want to be curious in that conversation, like where you're willing to start, like, or what's important to you? What, again, kind of back to ACT connection. What are your values? In all of this, like, here you are. And that's always an important thing. I remember in motivational interviewing, this person's showing up. And that's a really important piece. Like, there's something they're motivated around. Well, I just want to get my job back. I'm like, well, that's a great motivation. I want to stay out of jail. That's a wonderful motivation. These are good motivations for you. So let's talk about, like, what that might look like, and while also being compassionate, compassionate certainly, for the challenges this person's facing, but while also being, honest and transparent about the kinds of issues they might be facing. But it's about, how can we do this together? Again, as opposed to me signing the contract of, okay, I'm going to get this person across the line. And for providers, how can we thoughtfully approach your work in a way that we're not fixing or signing the contract to get somebody to do something, while we're also having conversations, perhaps, with whatever systems representative, who's overseeing our work, about, like, what it is that we're trying to do, and, trying to gain support for not signing the contract, helping, to spread the word about the different ways that people learn and grow. And I think a lot of systems representatives, in terms of supervisors, et cetera, kind of understand at this point, like, what MI is trying to do, but it's helping to kind of remind them. So I think, again, systems rules sometimes don't always fit with, like, good practice.
It's not just two people meeting in a room. They're the supervisors, that the bosses, there may be the parole officers or whoever is, like, having an eye on, like, chop, like, get this solved, get this done. And it's so interesting to see how so many things play together. And the orchestrator almost is, or no, not almost, like, the orchestrator of it is the facilitator, the therapist, sitting there and then managing all of that. And you write this in the book, that if this is the case, someone shows up and they don't want to do the work, they're just here because the parole officer, or the courts, or whoever, child protective service, whatever, is, like, breathing down their neck, and that's just why they're there. Like, the MI is the way to pick them up from where they are right now and ask these questions and see, like, where do we take this from here? Like, what change could we potentially look at? It's, like, glaringly obvious to me as I hear you talk about, like, all these problems coming together, that what's needed here is to gently guide and follow that person into the change that they ultimately then want to make themselves, because the only way they will make change happen is when they actually want to do that themselves. So actually, I wanted to tap into this. When I read this in the book overview, like, one of the bullet points that the galley discussed was working with people that are a little bit not as engaged as you'd want them. They don't want to be there. And so, of course, I, as a coach, I don't work with people that are, like, court mandated or have any other, like, pressure points, except sometimes HR or their managers or their bosses. And so I am looking very rarely at, like, one-on-one conversations with people, which is, that's a different matter. But what I'm curious about is when this happens in group workshops, when you have, like, a weekend retreat or a Thursday, Friday retreat. and you have your plans and everything is scheduled and you're at the place. And then you realize after 20 people there are 2 that are there because there's a hotel, there's good food, there's a pool, and it's better than sitting in the office. What would be your approach? Like grab them a little bit and pull them in, knowing full well that, hey, this is a group conversation. So I can't like spend an hour or 2 like engaging with them specifically around their missing motivation, pun intended. How would you go about participants that are not engaging in that situation?
So one of the things I think about in a group setting is, how I set it up, and everyone kind of starts their groups a little bit differently. But the idea of like expectation, maybe perhaps even, and options even from the beginning, and as far as like the idea of like structure, and you might do this. I certainly do this in a therapeutic sense. What we often consider like group rules, like group expectations. I actually use the term. I got this from the old like wellness recovery action planning. We used to talk about comfort agreements. I just love the phrase comfort agreements.
What is that? Right? What does that mean?
Yeah, it's like everyone kind of comes up with like what's going to help them be more comfortable in this environment that we're going to share today. So typically that would be a place in a lot of group setups where it's like, let's talk about our rules, let's talk about our structures. But I love the idea of what's going to help us be more comfortable here together. And I would anticipate that this person who's just showing up, the couple of people in your group are just showing up, they may not even participate in that conversation. But I think there's an important piece of, hey, we're going to come in here together and try to construct something. And that even to some degree, kind of their passive participation, their experience there, they get a chance to see right from the get-go that this is trying to be constructed as opposed to me trying to get them to do something. Right? We're trying to create a community. I think that can help with attitude.
Also would assume that something else happens, and that is that if you give them guidelines, like this is how we do things, or I'm going to email your boss, then we're going to look at reactance. We're going to look at like rebellion, potentially aggravated assault when I'm leaving the room. And so we have that. But on the other side, if we go into what would make everyone comfortable, they know that they are not here to fight against the environment they're in, but they're here to, at the very least, support their coworkers with what would make them comfortable. So if a coworker would say, you know what, like for me, it's just important that I get a lot out of the exercises. One of the people that would not be that willing to usually engage in a situation like that, well, like I can still do my coworker that favor and help them out, even though I don't want to. I don't care about the facilitator that much, but I care about my coworkers. And if that's their comfort agreement, then I'm willing to maybe not completely jump at the opportunity, but at least be willing to lean a little bit more into that.
Right. Again, I think there's so much about this sense of you're here, even if you don't feel like it was your choice to be here. How can you now then in this environment make some choices? Make some choices, and since you're here now, how can we be together? And if anything, maybe I'm just like really being too optimistic about this, but I like to be able to provide some sort of model. Again, this is not always easy. Sometimes it takes a lot of my own self-regulation to kind of go here, but I want to be a model of acceptance. And again, that's the spirit of MI. That's this place that we're going to come in. I'm going to be compassionate towards someone who maybe isn't like fully engaged, but also try to figure out a way of like what might they need, and maybe create more of an invitation type thing. So I think in the exercise or in the facilitation, again, I know this can vary depending on the different types of group interactions that people are having. And it might be harder to have folks be less participatory, but I do like to give lots and lots of choice around like how much and in what ways people participate, and different options for different types of exercises. And I'm always kind of thinking, what might, be something someone can choose from. So if I have an exercise, is there more than one way that someone can participate in this? And again, maybe traditional like group psychotherapy, you wouldn't be doing this as much, but I think some of our more behavioral interventions, are there ways to break people into like smaller units? So there's like more like people doing like dyad kinds of work. And I find that really helps a lot when there might be some sense of, I'm not really sure if I want to be here or if I'm comfortable being exposed, or I find that sometimes little smaller units can really be helpful as an example. So I'm always thinking about, what could be a possibility in doing these little experiments that might increase some kind of comfort.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Every day as a small business owner feels like solving a puzzle. One moment you're cruising along, and the next, there's a shipping snag that has you scrambling. But here's a surprise you will like. With Progressive, small business owners save 13% on their commercial auto insurance when they pay in full. So go ahead, surprise yourself. Get a quote in as little as 8 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Discounts not available in all states or situations.
You've given me some ideas and some hope here as well in regards to working with, I have my ways of working with them, but I'm always looking at better ways, new tiny experiments that I can make with like participants like that, where I shift things around and see how does that resonate with them. So comfort agreements are going to be on the agenda next. And since I hinted at hope, you have a chapter in the book as well about hope. And that surprised me. I did not see that coming. I don't know why. Like it makes sense. Like hope is so important in that setting. And I didn't see it coming at all. So you're talking a lot of the concepts that William Miller is talking about in a book about hope, another MI author, researcher. And I wanted to jump into a couple of ideas when it comes to hope, and maybe start with what role it plays in motivational interviewing. Now, what's the role of hope when the MI practitioner and the client are sitting together in the room and they're having a conversation? Who's carrying the hope? What's the distribution there?
Yeah, well, I think that can definitely very much vary, given, the individual needs and just how people are showing up. Again, this is just for us to be flexible, because some people show up and, they're ambivalent, but they're in a good place. They have a sense of like, things are going to get better. If I do something, something good's going to come out. And, in other places, we have folks coming in where it's just, they're despairing. And I think there is something, this gets into our genuineness chapter too, and just kind of this idea of having that type of self-disclosure where it's like, I have a belief in you. I think there's also a piece around compassion there too.
So that ties into the idea of the professional hoper. That is an exercise you have in the book to reflect on.
Yeah. And
so I think prompt in the book is like, write a job description. You're a professional hoper. What would that be like? And still working on that prompt, but I'm curious for Kristen, what the professional hoper in you, what is your job description when you bring that to the table? So
I am in the present moment with someone, always kind of be in the present moment, right? That's the place we have. But that my job is to, as a professional hoper, is to stay connected to the future potential. There's something very important about hope, because in the present moment, we're really having people mindfully engage in the here and now. Like that's, of course, a critical piece, right? That's where we can work. Right? And sometimes in the present, like I'm in this present and it's so uncomfortable. I'm so distressed. It's just, it's just awful. Like why am I here? Why am I doing any of this? And again, with this idea of lending, right? This idea of like my professional hoper job is like, you and I, if we can be here together now, right? My job is to be able to have a vision, maybe to have a conversation about what kinds of things that we could do now that might be changing some aspects. We can't control it. We don't know, but that might, create, better tomorrow kind of thing, right? So there's that place of really having that balance of why do anything? Why is any of this important? Or who cares about my values? It's like, well, I'm going to help maybe interpret that as my professional hoper role. I'm going to help just be in touch with that, not in a way that's creating false hope or that's dishonest, but that creates genuine and maybe has some sense of like possibility.
I found that part so interesting, and I have a follow-up question on that as well. But I think it was the beginning of this year or the beginning of last year. So every New Year's time around the new year, I go through my values and I see like, how do they still work for me? And I decided to put hope on as one of my core values for the year. And now, in the strictest act sense, hope is not a value. It's an emotion. It's not something that you can as a quality. And at the same time, I was thinking, I know this actually, like, to tie that into the professional hoper, like if hope is my value, then the question I'm asking myself is, how would I be doing this when? I wanted to say if, but that of course would not be perfectly act aligned. But how would I be doing this when I bring hope into it? And I'm still doing the same thing, but now it's infused with hope. And that might make it look a little bit different behaviorally. Like suddenly I'm doing things differently. Suddenly I'm writing this email differently because now I'm asking myself, how would this look like if I did it with hope? And
yeah, and I think that's an important piece. You're talking about how would this look like if I did it with hope. And for me, again, this is like my professional hoper kind of thing. It's like, and maybe for others, it's like hope is having hope and having that as a connection, as a value. Let's say, I mean, it does promote committed action, right? It does promote like I'm going to do something. If I have a sense that it matters, like life matters, that there's something that could be perhaps changed or influenced, or things could be different. What can I do in the here and now? So it is activating, right? It's like it's really kind of the opposite, I guess, of that. In some ways, it'd be just despair, which is just so paralyzing, right? But the sense of like there might just be a little bit of hope. There might be a reason, perhaps, to do something even just like a little bit differently.
There is Brené Brown talked about this in the Atlas of the Heart, where she describes different emotions. And like it's been a while that I went through the material, so I hope I'm getting the way she presented it right. But she talked about the different emotions and like worked through a lot of them one after the other. And she said the difference between anxiety and despair is that anxiety always comes with hope. By definition, there must be a component of hope in anxiety, no matter how tiny, but there must be a particle of hope. Otherwise, it's not anxiety anymore. It's just pure despair.
Yeah. Just that little piece can start to shift, right? Just that very profound emotional experience.
The anxiety always has but what if, right? They will yell at me. They will think I'm an idiot. I will embarrass myself. But what if not? That is the tiny little thing that hopefully shifts the thinking towards, okay, let me try that out. Let me prioritize the little spark of hope that is in that mix and not put the spotlight on the fear side of things, on the anxiety side of things.
Yeah, I'll say how important that is for like motivational interviewing and perhaps ACT or anything else, any other kind of helping work. Is that, we're working with folks and coming in, and it's like, okay, let's start where you're ready to start. Let's have these conversations. And there is a big difference, with someone who's maybe more despairing, and one of the things I always feel such pain around is when someone comes in and they say the words like, I'm broken. And and then again, that's my red light, want to fix it moment where it's like, you're not broken, but I don't immediately go there, but there is something that's very important about, okay, where might hope start to show up here? Where might I start to, and ask permission to be the holder of the hope, to maybe perhaps enter that in, because this going to be really hard to change and grow if someone's so despairing that it's like, I'm just a mess. And the fact, again, I have to always remind myself, like they're showing up.
Yeah, exactly.
So they probably have a little bit of hope there somewhere. And that's often the way I kind of get to that. It's like, and you're here.
Exactly. And you're here. And you're
we're talking together and we're in this relationship. And that's amazing. I'm so glad you're here. You know, there's just something that just, again, the relationship itself was just so hopeful to being together.
Beautiful. Well, isn't that a nice way to wrap this up? If I didn't have one question, I must ask you, and this is weirdly enough, at the end of the interview, I ask you something that you write, that you and your co-author, you write in the very first paragraph or two. And that is, you make this joke that when you teach someone MI, you almost have to get consent from them, because if someone learns motivational interviewing, it will change them as a person. Yeah. And I can certainly speak to that for myself. Like, since I've learned about motivational interviewing, I'm asking myself MI questions that are weirdly empowering. Who knew? Right? And so I'm curious, you've been doing this for a long time. You've been doing, I think, for 2 decades, 3. How has living and breathing MI, both as an author and a teacher and a therapist and all of that, how has that changed you as a person?
Yeah, well, as a therapist and as someone who's trying to work in a world that is challenging and increasingly challenging in so many ways, it's given me a place to come that's always about compassion and curiosity, and just the ability to be with people. Again, it gets back to kind of that fix-it thing. I've been able to really certainly prevent burnout, because it's just, there's a certain amount of peace, and there's just a certain amount of, this is good enough. Not only is this good enough to have this conversation with someone and just to kind of be with them, like, that's the work. Like, that's the work. I've been able to just in my life in many ways, but certainly in the work, be able to step away from, again, I got to get something, I got to be controlled. It has to be this certain outcome. Am I doing this right? Like, it's not like I don't have days of imposter syndrome, or other challenges, like, just being human. We all kind of get to that place of frustration, but it's really allowed me to be able to focus on, like, what's important, which is really about being in a relationship, about being connected, and knowing that, like, there's so many different pathways around healing. And so I think really to answer your question, I mean, I often talk about this, again, we talk about how has MI changed you? Many of the conversations I have around that, especially with new learners, it's like, I wouldn't be here if I didn't learn MI, because I was on a real fast track to burning out early career, because I was doing so much work in the space of people, again, being mandated, or, being around, being ambivalent because of their substance use. I was mostly in substance use treatment. And the way of working with that was so confrontational. Like, it was so not aligned with how I wanted to be as a person, that if I didn't have this, I wouldn't have survived in the field. There just must be no way I'd be able to do that. And then all those years of working in this particular way, I can go back and just kind of remember and just think of the different interactions and people I've worked with. And it's just, it's incredibly rewarding, but it's just, wow, this is such a different way of being. So it's really allowed me to be certainly much more present, effective, open, curious, all the things that are incredibly meaningful, like, as a person, and as a provider. And I think it's also allowed me, just as a person, to be more open to my own experiences and to take risks that I wouldn't necessarily take. I'm going to travel to this place, or I'm going to try this new hobby, or this new thing that maybe I would just be too like, I can't do that before. So just, yeah.
Beautiful. Well, Kristen, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me about this amazing book, Advancing Motivational Interviewing. Where would you like to send our listeners if they want to know more about you and what you do?
Probably the most consistent place where I post would be LinkedIn at this point. And Kristen, by the spelled with 2 I's. And another place is KristenDempseyCounseling.com. It's my website, which is open and functioning, but I'm always updating, reconstructing it. So I'm kind of in a reconstruction mode right now, but I try to, in addition, talking about my practice and that kind of stuff, but I have posted, like, the books that I have out. And then I also have different videos and podcasts, such as this podcast and others that I posts so you can learn more about me and some of the other types of work I'm doing in motivational interviewing. So that might be the one-stop shop for Kristin Dempsey counseling stuff would be my website. So the KristinDempseyCounseling.com.
Perfect. And dear listener, your very first one-stop shop are the show notes where you find all the links conveniently. So Kristen with 2 eyes, thank you very much for your time. And it's so good to talk to you always.
Oh, likewise, Michael. Thank you so much. I always enjoy our conversations together.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. You can now listen to our podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on our website or go to patreon.com/offtheclocksite.
If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review and sharing this episode with a friend or an enemy who would enjoy it.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our fabulous newsletter on Substack. Or if you're still addicted to social media, find us on Instagram and LinkedIn.
We'd like to thank our rockstar production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
Now for the boring part. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.